right, everybody, please welcome to the stage, Bryan Berlin! Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for being here. My name's Bryan, and I've been running for over the last 10 years of my life, and I still don't know if I like it or not. Yeah, and you're laughing, because that's a long time to be doing something and still being so unsure if you're getting anything out of it. Like, if I started to play the guitar, and, I don't know, after 2 months, I'm like, I don't think the guitar is for me, I don't think I'd keep playing it for another 10 years, right? Unless, like, it was something your parent was making you do in middle school, which then you could just be like, I'm gonna try the piano or the drums or just stop instruments entirely. But I have been doing this thing for so long, and I can't stop, and I don't know why, and so I put the show together to try to figure it out with all of you. This is gonna be like a look into my past and try to figure out like why I'm still doing this and if I'm enjoying it, and we as a crowd will figure out if he likes it or not. Do we have runners in the audience here? All right, that's like, it's too exciting. You're too excited about running. You're all kind of like my friend Carl. My friend Carl, him and I, we've known each other since college, and we were catching up recently, and we hadn't seen each other in like 10 years, so it's kind of like, what has your life been like the last 10 years? And at a certain point, I was like, oh, I've kind of gotten into running. And when I said running, he's like, oh my God, I love running so much. And his eyes lit up, and for the next 10 minutes, he's just going on and on about his relationship with trail running. And Carl, he's got long hair and a beard and a dog, and he lives in Vermont, so he is a trail runner, like that is his world. But he tells me about trail running, and for him, it's this way that he could just cut himself off from the world, go out in the woods, just focus on putting one foot in front of the other and having everything else melt away. And I'm hearing this, and I'm like fascinated by it, but I'm also mad, because that is not the experience I get running at all. Like, I do not feel any of that when I run. And so it makes me think about this book that I read not too long ago, by Haruki Murakami. And he's a novelist, but he wrote this kind of memoir about his relationship with running. It's called What I Talk About When I Talk About Running. And in the first chapter of the book, he's telling his like how he got into running. And the way he got into running was at 33 years old, he was like smoking a pack a day and was suddenly like, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to start running marathons. And I was just like, there's no middle ground. There's no like, I'm going to get some patches and maybe run a 5K. It was just like, no smoking to marathon. And then since he ran his first marathon at 33, he has run a marathon every year of his life, and he's in his 70s now. And he's still doing this, right? Although he did say one year he took off running a marathon, but he ran a triathlon. Which to me is kind of like a doctor taking a year off and on his in his side time like curing cancer. And I'm just like, what is this guy doing? And I also, this is the thing, I feel like whenever you mention running, this thing always comes up where people, like within 10 seconds of you mentioning you're a runner, somebody's like, have you ever run a marathon? And it's fascinating to me that this is like what runners are working towards in life, because if we all know, the first person who ran a marathon, he ran it 2,500 years ago. His name was Phidippides, which we all know is Greek for lover of pain. And he finished the race, which wasn't really a race, I know it was a war, there was things going on, but he finished and he died at the end of it, right? Like he did this thing and died, and runners were like, yeah, let's do this. Let's make this a normal thing that we work towards. And so I'm reading this book and I'm not connecting at all, but he does say this thing, when he talks about running, he says he runs to acquire the void. And for him, he even gives this like example of the void, which when he goes on a run, he pictures the thoughts that are coming into his head as clouds in the sky. And as he sees the thoughts come into his head, they're just these wispy white clouds that float by. And he could just let them float by, and then just get this beautiful blue sky to run to. And I'm realizing the reason I don't get this at all, like I don't get that or the thing that my friend Carl feels, is because when I run, I do have thoughts come into my head like I do all the time in my life, but instead of just being like a nice light cloud that just slowly fades away, it gets bigger and darker and turns into a thunderstorm in my brain. And I'm realizing that like I don't have the void, I have the noise, which is also called generalized anxiety disorder. Yeah, like that's a thing that I've been diagnosed with, and it does feel a little bit like doctors being like, hey, we're not really sure what's going on with you, but generally you need to chill out. Like that's me, if you haven't figured it out so far in the first few minutes of this. But I know that I have this noise in my head, and I can't get rid of it, and I've also had it for a really long time in my life. I remember one of my first experiences with the noise. I was 14 years old, and I was going into high school. And at that point in my life, I kind of had like 6 friends, and we all like went to middle school together, we went to high school together, and we were all going to join the soccer team together. And the night before tryouts, one of my friends is like, how are you guys feeling about tryouts? And we're all like, yeah, good, it's going to be fine, whatever. Like, there's a freshman team, so we're all going to be on the freshman team. And then another friend is like, oh, well, how are you feeling about having to run 2 miles? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And they're like, yeah, to make the team, you have to run 2 miles in 16 minutes. And I literally was just like, well, I'm a freshman, I'll be on the freshman team. I didn't know I couldn't make the freshman team. And I also didn't know I had to run 2 miles in 16 minutes. And I just started freaking out. Like, that storm started in my brain. Because at this point in my life, I had only had one experience running every year. And it was for the presidential fitness test. Right? Yeah, we all know the presidential fitness test, right? You know, you would do sit-ups and push-ups, and then at the end of these 2 weeks, you get a letter from the president being like, congratulations, you're in shape. Yeah, I don't know why, like, George Clinton was making that call, or Bill Clinton. It was George Bush and Bill Clinton at the same time. They're all the same, you know, we're all... I don't want to get the show's not getting political, I'm sorry. But presidents, I don't know if they should be making that call. But we would always do this thing, right? The last event of the presidential fitness was the mile. But my event, like, it was kind of one of the early ones to get you going, but it was the sit and reach. And the sit and reach was my event because you literally didn't have to do anything. You just sat and just saw how far. And to this day, like, I could still get my hands, like, on, yeah. Right? Like, sign me up for a professional sit and reach. Every time I do that, I'm slightly worried I'm going to throw out my back. And hopefully that will never happen again. But yeah, the last event was the mile. And the mile, what would happen is you would have to go out to the track, and you'd have to run 4 laps around the track, right? And you have to do it in 10 minutes, and I would always like be bored by my first lap and just like hating everything by my second lap. I'd cry and I'd crawl my way to the finish. I would do it in like 9 minutes and 58 seconds, right? I'd be like the last person to get across the line to not have to do it again the next day in gym. And that was my experience with running. And I'm doing that math in my head, and I'm like, well, if I can run 1 mile in 10 minutes, I'm somehow going to have to run a second mile in 6 minutes. I don't think I can have that kind of runner's high at the age of 14. And so I'm panicking. Like, the night leading up to tryouts, I'm just in bed thinking about this over and over again. I'm like, what am I going to do? How am I going to do this? And I wake up and I go to tryouts. There's like 50 kids at tryouts, and all the coaches are there, and they're like, all right, everybody, we're going to warm up with a mile. And in my head, I'm like, a mile should be the whole practice. Like, that we should just do a mile and go home. But we have to start with a mile. And out of all the 50 people who run this race, I am last. I'm nowhere near where I need to be for the 2 miles in 60 minutes. I'm nowhere near my friends. And the rest of the tryouts, I can't even remember what's happening because all I can think about is this run and how it's going to keep me from joining the team. And so I go home that night, and I have this pain in my heel. And it is a real pain, but when my mom and dad are talking to me over dinner about tryouts, I'm like, yeah, it was nice, but like my heels kind of hurts, and I'm leaning into it a little bit, like, yeah, we don't know, this could be permanent damage, I could lose a limb, like maybe I should take tomorrow off. And they're like, yeah, that's fine, don't, like, take care of yourself. And so I don't go to tryouts the next day, or the day after that, or ever again. Like, I just stopped going to tryouts because I didn't want to fail. And so that's what it's like living in my head. That's just a little bit of what that noise is like, and it's only grown over the last 20 years. It's something that I do deal with all the time. And I think my justification at the time was, yeah, like, I'm not going to get to do this thing with my friends, and we're not all going to have this thing together, but I'm not trying to be a professional soccer player, so why do this thing that keeps me from doing this thing I don't want to do, and I could just avoid it? Okay, that's great. And so that's what I did. I just, like, avoided the soccer team, and I went on with my life, and I got to college, and I graduated, and I had this other dream, and that was to be a TV sitcom writer. You know, I was in high school when The Office and Arrested Development came out, and I was like, yeah, let me do that. Like, give me that job. Looking back on it, I think I would have had a better chance of being a professional soccer player than I would a TV sitcom writer. Like, that is not a job you just get handed out of college. And I'm graduating at the end of the recession. Like, it's a bad time for jobs. And I'm getting desperate, and so I take a job in reality television because it kind of feels dream adjacent, right? Like, you could be watching National Geographic and watch this nature documentary that I'm working on, and then all of a sudden you'd flip a few channels and be watching a sitcom on NBC, and I'm like, yeah, I could figure that out, right? And so I take this job working for the Travel Channel on a show called Red, White, and New. Yeah, I know it sounds more like a clothing line at Walmart than a TV show, but it was actually a really cool show. We had a host who was traveling the country, and he was looking for all these great like American inventors and only in America experiences. He would meet the people, experience the thing that they created, and then that was our TV show. And I am like right out of college being like, okay, I get to work in production, I get to go send out in the field, this is incredible. And so I go to 13 states in 30 days, just on this production crew. Yeah, it's a little bit grueling, but also I'm 22 years old, and I'm like, yeah, you could do whatever you want, and I'll do it. And because I'm also like, I want to be good, so that they will promote me to scripted television and get on a sitcom, right? Like, I think it's like a farm system, right? And I can get called up into the big leagues. And so I'm working really hard on this TV show, and it's also not like a movie set, right? There's not craft services and all these trailers, and every one person has one job, and that's their only thing. Like, it's very low budget television. And so our crew, it's 5 people. So over these 30 days, I'm with 5 people. I'm with our host, I'm with our camera person, our sound person, our director, and me. And if you look at all those other titles, they all have like pretty clear roles to them. Like, we all know what a camera person does, we all know what an audio person does. My role was associate producer, which I quickly learned is all the roles they didn't want to pay anybody else for that were left over. Like, I was doing so much on the show where we would go on set for the first day, and I'd be driving us to set. And then I would be like setting up cameras for our first shot. I'd be setting up the interview. I'd be conducting the interviews. I'd be running these, like, all this stuff. I'd go get lunch, and then at the end of the day, I'd have to, like, pack everything up and bring us back to the hotel, offload all the footage, send it back to our production company. I was doing everything. And I really was fine with it, and I got along with everybody on this team pretty well, except for our director. Yeah, which is a tough person because it is kind of that main person, but to my defense, he did have this problem directing. And that's tough when that is literally your entire job, is like, tell people what to do. But he would have this thing. He was, his name was Joe, and he had this curly, messy hair, and it felt like he just wanted to be directing an indie film that was going to premiere at Cannes. And instead, he was just working in reality TV with the rest of us, right? And he would do this thing where he'd be like, hey, Brian, so, we have a next part of our shoot coming up, and we have to interview the inventor, but then we also have to set up the GoPros over here, and then just leave that for me. And I'd be like, okay, well, do you want me to go do the interview? And he'd be like, well, I don't know how to use the GoPros. I'd be like, okay, so it seems like you want me to go, just tell me to go do the GoPros and I'll do the GoPros, right? And that was the thing, right? This was the early 2010s. GoPros were huge. And because we were the Travel Channel, a lot of our advertising was like, sell plane tickets. So it was a lot of, let's put our viewers in the head of the host, right? So when our host went to a Hollywood stunt school in Florida and it was jumping out of a 3-story building, we had a GoPro on his head so we could like, this is what it's like to jump out of a 3-story building, right? And so a lot of it was like, okay, Brian, what can we do with the GoPros? What did we do that we went swimming with sharks, with a shark suit, and I had a GoPro on a broom handle and had sharks biting at it, right? And so that was my job for a lot of this shoot. And over the 30 days we're doing this, and I'm getting more and more worn down, especially with Joe, and we get to our last shoot, and it's for this thing called Warrior Dash. And Warrior Dash doesn't exist anymore, but it's like an obstacle course 5K, very similar to like a Tough Mudder, if you've ever heard of that before. And every day before our shoots, me and the director, we'd go scout out the location. And all of our things we had done to this point was like, here's one location where this thing is happening. And we show up to scout this 5K, and we quickly realized that like, oh, that's 3 miles. Like this whole thing is gonna take place over a really wide area. And so we are literally driving like an off-road golf cart through this entire course. And there's gonna be hundreds of thousands of people running this thing. We only have one cameraman. Yeah, it's chaos, right? And it's also truly our last day where we're just like, whatever we got to do to make this thing happen. But as we're driving the course, me and Joe are both coming to this realization at the same time, and he says it out loud, which is, I think someone's going to need to run the course with a GoPro on their head. And I know the second he says that, he means, Bryan, you're going to have to run the course with a GoPro on your head. Because, again, our host is running this. He has to look good for television. He can't have a GoPro on it. But he's not going to run the course 2 times, like once with a GoPro, once without the GoPro. So I now have to become him running the course. And so I go back to the hotel that night, and I'm supposed to be like prepping for this shoot. I'm supposed to be taking all these notes. And all I could do, this storm is brewing in my head, and I'm like, oh my God, I have to run tomorrow? What the hell? Like, this is not... Because it's been 10 years since I've quit the soccer team, and I'm like, I never ran since. What are we doing? And I go down to the hotel gym, which is literally just a treadmill and a bike. But I get on the treadmill, and I decide to just start running. And I tell myself I just want to see if I can run 2 miles. Because at this point, I literally have not run since quitting the soccer team. And I'm on this treadmill, and I'm just questioning every life choice that has gotten me here to this point. And I'm starting to think that maybe this is not going to translate into getting a job writing sitcoms. Like, it doesn't feel like a one-to-one. And I'm choking on the chlorine from the pool next door, but I do complete 2 miles. It's very slow, but I do 2 miles. And then I immediately realized that maybe I should not have run 2 miles. You all know, the night before I had to run 3 miles for the shoot, but I just needed to know that I could do it, you know? And so the next morning I wake up, and I'm just hating everything. I'm dreading. I'm driving very slow to the location. And we get there, and what was just this like empty field in the middle of nowhere in Oklahoma has been transformed into a party happening at 9 a.m. Like, everyone is in costumes, everyone is drinking, and I just look around, and I am by far the most miserable person in this field of people. And I have a GoPro on my head, so I look real dumb. And I get sent into the corral area, right? They have these like fences, and you get sent in, and they're like, okay, ready to go. And I'm just standing there, and I'm this ball of anxiety, and I don't know what to do. And I look over to the right of me, and there's a guy, and he is dressed in a full Viking outfit with a tutu on. And he looks over at me, and he's like, are you ready to race? And I just look back at him, and I'm like, no. And he is like, immediately turns away from me like I am cancer to him. And then like a few seconds later, the PA announcer comes on and is like, is everybody ready? And there's this huge cheer. And I'm in this tight corral of 100 people, and we get sent out. And I just get like thrown out into this course. I'm swept up in all of these people. And I get this adrenaline spike that I've never felt before in my life. And I'm like, oh, I get maybe why people run. And so now I'm out in this course. And again, it's an obstacle course. It's not just like run a 5K. It's like run a 5K and do difficult physical activities. And so we get to the first obstacle, and it is it's a cargo net on one side and a water slide on the back side, and then there's just water spraying down everywhere on you. And so I'm like climbing up this cargo net, but I'm not just climbing up the cargo net, but I'm also trying to make sure it looks good for the GoPro that's on my head. So like every handhold I'm trying to keep in frame. And then I get on the side, and I like crest down the waterfall, and I'm trying to get a nice splash with my feet, and I get this nice little effect. I'm like, okay, cool, I nailed it. And then I'm ready to go on to the course, and I see my director, Joe, and he's like waving me over. I'm like, God, what the fuck does he want? And I come over to Joe, and he's like, hey, I'm realizing that we're actually gonna need some B-roll of other people doing the obstacles, right? Because there's one cameraman who's just running the race with our host. I'm running the race with a GoPro, but there's a bunch of other people running this race, and they need to be seen doing it when we set up the obstacles. So I'm like, okay. And he's handing me a camera like it's this piece of garbage he wants me to get rid of because he doesn't know how to use cameras. And so he hands me a camera, and I film people doing the obstacle that I just did for like a minute. And then I hand the camera back to Joe, and I head out onto the course. And so for the next like 45 minutes, I am just like going through tire swings, I'm crawling under barbed wire, I'm jumping over fire pits, and after every obstacle, Joe has beat me there in his stupid golf cart with this little smug smile on his face, hands me the camera, I film it, I hand it back to him, and I go through all these obstacles. And I get to the last obstacle, and it's a mud pit. It's like literally a mud pit. It's like probably 1.5 feet deep. And you just have to kind of like doggy paddle. It's thick, there's barbed wire above it, so you can't stand up. And we're all just like doggy paddling through this thick, muddy water. And then I see Joe, and he's doing this. And I'm like, what does he want? And I'm realizing he wants me to dunk my head into the muddy water to get the GoPro shot submerging under. And nobody's putting their mouth anywhere near this water. It very much has diseases in it. But I've lost all my dignity at this point. And there's also this part of me that's like, oh, that would kind of be a cool shot. So I dunk my head into the water. The show has been lost to time. I don't think you could find it online anywhere, but in the final cut of the show, there is a second of my head dunking into the water as the host. And so I guess I succeeded in reality television. But I finished the race, right? And it feels not nice. I feel like I have two immediate thoughts when I finish, which is like, I never want to work in reality television again, and I never want to run again. But I do finish. And I know that I'm not supposed to take the medals that they're handing out because I'm not like registered to run the race. I didn't pay them to run the race. But like, not only did I run this entire race, but I filmed an entire episode of TV doing the race. And so I stole one of the medals. Yeah. And that was the first race I ever ran. It was not fun. But yeah, I really felt burnt out after that race, and I was immediately like, I need a break from reality television if I'm ever gonna come back, and I did come back because I was desperate, but like, had a little break from reality television, and I had such a break from reality television, I kind of had a breakdown, and I spent that summer, after the show ended, going back to my like childhood summer camp to be a counselor, because I was like, I need just a way to recharge, and to be fair, the summer camp was a very important part of my life. Like, I had my first kiss at the summer camp. I had my first girlfriend at the summer camp. There were two different girls, but they were both named Jen, which I guess was my type. But it was a really important part of my life, and I went there that summer kind of being like, this is going to be my reality TV rehab. And I spent this really nice summer there. It's in like the mountains of New Hampshire. It is so beautiful. It's on a lake. And I just have this really recharging experience. And I leave that summer being like, well, this camp is in New Hampshire. There's a lot of good that has come to my life from this camp. Maybe New Hampshire is the answer for the next chapter of my life. It was not the answer. But I took a job at an ad agency in New Hampshire, and I was 23 and single. And I quickly learned that New Hampshire is a terrible place to live when you're 23 and single. There was like 10 or 15 people at my job, and all of them were like 5 or 10 years older than me, all had like life partners and kids, and it just kind of felt like they were lapping me in life. Like I just didn't feel like I was fitting in any way. And after a month or two of being there, I did find a pickup soccer group. And it finally felt like maybe this is my ticket into some kind of social life, right? So, because I was not hanging out with any of the people at work, I would get out of work and then go play soccer for 2 hours with these people, and it was great. And it was my first time playing soccer since high school, and it was fun to do it where I'm like, oh, I'm not gonna be tested whether or not I can run 2 miles at the end of this. And I thought, again, like we would do this thing together, and then like most people in their 20s, we're all like young, doing things, let's go out to a bar. And everyone would finish, get in their cars, and just go back to their lives. And I was so confused as to what was happening. And I kind of made this realization that, like, I think everyone in New Hampshire, you know, they grew up locally in New Hampshire. They got 6 friends when they were young kids. They went to college at the state school. They graduated and went to the big city. And the whole time, their 6 friends have been there. And they've just been like, yeah, I'm good. I don't need anybody else, right? Like, I was just floating amongst these friend groups of 6 friends that I could not break into. And I just didn't know how like I could feel like a part of anything at that point. And so the next summer was coming up, and I was like, maybe I should go back to camp. And I'm like, no, I'm too old. Like, it would be bad if I went back to camp just for my like own personal, like, moving forward in life. But my camp was doing this big fundraiser that they had never done before. They're a nonprofit camp, and they were doing this fundraiser where there was an event in New Hampshire called Reach the Beach, which is it's a Ragnar relay race. And the easiest way to describe it is 12 people on a team running 200 collective miles in like a 36-hour period. Like, that is the race. And in New Hampshire, you start at a ski mountain in the northern part of New Hampshire, and you run down to literally the Atlantic Ocean, and it ends on the beach and like the southeast corner of the state. And my camp was like, we're going to sign up for this race and do it as a fundraiser. And I was like, great, I'm not going to be involved in that. But they were like, no, the camp director was like, Bryan, I know you're good with computers, and we have a lot of people. Like, they signed up there's 400 teams who sign up for this race. We signed up 4 teams to run for camp, and my camp director was like, Bryan, we have people that just like don't know how to upload a photo to a fundraising page, forget their passwords. Like, can you just help with all the IT stuff? Which, it's like parent IT stuff, right? You know, it was not real IT stuff, but I was like, great, I do want to help the camp. This is the way I could do it. And so I'm helping doing all this IT work. I'm resetting passwords almost every day. It's a lot. It's a lot of resetting passwords. But then like every few weeks, the camp director would call me and be like, hey, this person got injured. We're going to add this person from our waiting list. Can you set up a page for them? And I'm like, great, that's fine. And it's now like 2 weeks before the race, and we're having our little check-in call. And he's like, oh, by the way, I need you to take this person down. They got hurt. And I'm like, okay, cool. Who should I add in their place? And there's this long pause. And he goes, oh, I thought maybe you'd want to do it. And we've known each other for a while. There's no part of my personality that's ever like, yeah. Over the course of us coordinating this thing, I'm always like, wow, it's crazy that so many people would want to do this. And he's finally like, hey, I know that this might be not something you'd be into, but maybe it would be something that would be good for you. And he was really preying on the fact that I was so desperate for any kind of social connection that he was like, maybe go on a run and see how you do. And I go get a membership at Planet Fitness. And that night I get on a treadmill and I run a 5K. Because like, this is as far as I've ever run. Can I still do it? It's been a year. And I do it. I run a 5K. And then he's like, okay, maybe go try again a day or two later. And then like 2 days later, I go back to Planet Fitness. And I just say I'm going to run as far as I can go before my body gives up on me. And I make it 5.5 miles, which is a lot. And I tell him that, and he's like, great, I think you might be ready. And here's the thing. If I were to say yes, the first leg of the 3 legs of this relay I had to run was 9 miles. So I couldn't even do the first leg of this thing, and I have to do 2 more. And so, again, I know he's lying to me, but I'm so desperate to do anything. And so I say yes. And so the next thing I know, I'm in a van. It's 4 a.m, and we are driving to the ski mountain to start this stupid race. And it's funny, it's this like 12-passenger van, and I am in the back seat, and I am just in a fetal position, being like, why did I say yes to this? And again, I was saying yes because of the camp, but the other thing was I was on a team with all camp people who were like 10 years older than me. And so I didn't know them at all, but we did kind of share some experiences in language, and they were all really supportive. But the other thing about them is they were all really good at running. And so they would go out. I was the last person in our van to have to do their leg. So all of them were going out, running their race, and running like 6, 7, 8, 9 miles, and just coming back so fast, and coming back as if they just like went around the corner to pick up milk, like barely are sweating, barely look like they put in any effort. And as every runner comes back in, I'm just getting like more and more of a ball in the back of the van. And finally, I'm the next person. And one of the teammates, he looks at me, and he's the one who's known me the longest, and he's just like, hey, Bryan, I know this is probably a lot, but like, if you weren't here, we wouldn't have been able to do this. Yeah, I know it felt really supportive, but I also kind of heard it as, we needed anybody to do this, and you were the sucker who said yes. And so now it's my turn, and because it's a relay, right, you just get like in the kind of transition area, and you're waiting for your runner to come around the corner. You have a rough estimate of when they're gonna be there, but I'm waiting, and I'm waiting, and I'm waiting, and what's happening is there's a curve in the road, and every time somebody comes around the curve, I just get this adrenaline, like, please don't be them, please don't be them, oh God, it's not them, please don't be them, please, it's not them. And then finally, I do see my runner, and they're getting closer and closer to me, and I am just like, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this. And I start to think to myself, if I run away from them, they won't be able to hand off and I could just get out of here. But finally they're up on me and they hand off and I just take off and there's this huge cheer. And I get this adrenaline spike again that I've just like never felt before. And now I'm off on this 9-mile run. And I decided in my head, the way I was like, the only way I could decide I was going to do this was, I'm going to break this down into 3 5Ks, because that's what 9 miles is. It's basically 3 5Ks. I've run a 5K once, so I could just do 3 of them back to back to back. And so I do the first 5K, and I'm okay. My van stops on the side of the road to meet me at the 5K mark, and they give me some water and they give me a pep talk, and then I take off on the next 5K. And that next 5K, I'm still moving, but I could start to feel my body rejecting everything that is happening here. And as this is happening, this thing happens when I'm running that I've never experienced before. But people are passing me, which is not the thing I didn't experience. I was expecting people to pass me. But as they pass me, they do this thing where they go, "Looking good, runner." And it really pissed me off. For 2 reasons. The first reason it really pissed me off is because, one, they're being like, "Yeah, you're looking good, but I'm looking better because I'm literally passing you right now," right? The other thing that really pissed me off about it is, like, I did not look good. It was like mid-afternoon in early September. It was hot. And I looked like I had been like dragged out of the ocean and told to run as if I had never walked before. So I'm just like doing this, and I don't look good. And every time I'm getting madder and madder and madder. And I make it that second 5K, but I'm starting to fall apart a little bit. And I get my little pep talk and my water, and I'm on my last 5K, and I make it to 7 miles, and I have to start walking. And I'm just walking, and I'm thinking about like how long it's going to take me to walk 2 miles instead of run 2 miles, and how my team's going to be waiting for me at the transition area, and they're going to be thinking I died. And as I'm thinking all this guy comes up from beside me, and I'm just like, don't fucking say it. But instead, he just starts walking alongside me, and he just goes, "It's hot out here, huh?" And I'm like, yeah, it's really hot out here. And for once, I'm like, finally, somebody who's on my team, like, we're going to be able to complain about this for the next 20 minutes. And I say, "Oh, is this your first time doing this?" And he's like, "No, it's my 7th. And I'm like, wow, who dragged you out here 7 times? And how can I help you? But he starts telling me his life story. And then after like a minute, he's like, "Hey, I think I'm going to start running again. If you want, we can run together." And suddenly I feel like I have to impress this stranger. And I'm like, "Yeah, great, I'm ready to go." And so we start jogging together. And again, he's telling me his whole life story, and it's a very one-sided conversation because I cannot form a sentence. I am breathing so heavily. And we get to 8 miles, and I'm starting to feel like, again, my body is hitting its limit. And as I'm slowing down, we see this woman who's walking. And as we approach her, we just start walking, and I just say, like, without even thinking, "Hey, it's hot out here, huh?" And she's like, "Yeah." And the next thing I want to do is tell her how good of a runner I am and how I've done this 10 times. But again, I can't really form a sentence. So we're just walking alongside each other, and after a minute, I'm like, "Hey, I think if you want to start running with us, we can run together and we'll run at your pace." And she's like, "Yeah." And so again, we start running together. And now this guy's telling us his wife's life story, his kids' life stories, because again, we're just dying on the other side of things. And it's not quite like us arm in arm going down the yellow brick road together, but we do get to the finish together. And it's funny, I never like learned their names and I never saw them again. But it was this connection that I had never really experienced up until that point in my life, and it felt really special. Until I remembered I still had 2 more legs of this relay to run. At 3 a.m, I had to run 5.5 miles. Yeah, which the amount of miles you should have to run at 3 a.m. is 0. Like, that's what we should be running at 3 a.m. I had to do that. And then around like 10 or 11 a.m. the next morning, I had 3 miles to run. And it's funny, after that first mile, I was realizing my legs were sort of like, I don't know what's happening anymore, but we'll just go. And so after that first mile, I just decided, like, I don't have any plans to run ever again. I'm just going to push myself to see how far and fast I can go. And I do the last 2 miles of that run in 16 minutes. Yeah. You know, I reached out to my high school and was like, I could be on the team now. And they were like, "No, you're an adult. We don't want you near the kids." But it's funny because, like, literally the only reason I was able to do any of that relay at all is because I had spent the 3 months leading up to that race playing soccer 3 times a week. Like, I was in the best shape of my life. And it made me mad because I was like, oh, if I had just been on the soccer team by the end of the season, I would have been able to run 2 miles in 16 minutes. And also, I was a goalie. If I'm running 2 miles in a game, something's gone wrong. Like, that's not what I should, but anyway, I had, that was like definitely the first thought that came into my head. The second thought that came into my head was like, oh, if I actually trained for this, I could do better next year. And that feels kind of like a gateway drug for runners, this idea that like we could just do a little bit better if we work a little bit harder next time. And so I decided I was going to sign up again. And not only was I going to sign up, but I told all my camp friends about it. And I was like, yeah, you do this thing, you're up for 24 hours straight, and you're in a van, and you smell, and you hate it, but it's fun. And they're like, great, sign us up. And so we signed up to do this race again. But I immediately moved out of New Hampshire after this race, because I was like, I think this is bad for my mental health. And I moved to New York City. And it was funny because I lost the soccer. Like, I couldn't find a good pickup group here. But I gained Prospect Park, and all of a sudden I was near this park, and I had to train for this race. Like, I was doing it, and I wasn't running for soccer, and I was like, I gotta just go on a run? Like, that seems weird. I don't do that. It's funny, like, for me, you know, I would go on this run around Prospect Park, and I kind of had like a 3-mile loop and a 4-mile loop and a 5-mile loop, and I started to learn the park really well and get comfortable at this park. And then that fall, my friends and I did Reach the Beach together, and I felt really good, and we did it. And then the first run I did, when I got back from Reach the Beach, I had this weird pain in my knee, and I was like, that's strange. I don't need to run for a while. I'll just forget about it. And so that next year, I signed up for Reach the Beach with my friends again, and I did that same training of like 2 months before I ran Reach the Beach. And this time during Reach the Beach, I got the pain in my knee, and I couldn't finish running. And so I got home and I was like, maybe I should figure out what's going on. And so I went on Google and I figured out I had an issue with my IT band. And it runs from your knee to your hip. And basically what happens is when you run too much too fast, my IT band was basically saying like, hey, we can't keep up with you, like stop. And so the way to really fix this is like stop running, or consistently run so you can build up that muscle and get it figured out. The second option wasn't something I was trying to do. But at this point in those 3 years that I had run Reach the Beach for my camp, that we had raised $200,000 for this camp, which that's like 4,000 kids who could come to this camp and fall in love with somebody named Jen, right? And I was just like, it's cool that we're doing this. I want to be able to keep doing this for kids. And so I decided that then the solution was I need to run year round. The problem with that is I don't like running. For me, running is like when you go out to dinner and they ask you if you want a side of fries or a side of salad with your meal. I'm always going to pick fries. But like, say you're on vacation and you know, you're out 4 nights in a row, and on that 4th night, you've had fries, and your body's like, please get a salad, right? And that's my last resort running option, is that 4th night where I'm like, I guess I should go for a run now. And then I go on the run, and I say, well, I went on a run. I deserve some ice cream. And then I remember that I'm an adult, and I could just have ice cream whenever I want, and so I don't go on the run, and I eat ice cream. And so it's very hard for me to go on a run. And so to counteract this, I signed up for a half marathon. Again, not the greatest, I should have just stopped running. But again, I wanted to do this thing for the kids. And that race was in the fall, and the Brooklyn Half Marathon is in the spring. And so if I had this kind of thing to sign up for and train for, I was hoping the fear of failure would make me go on these training runs and do this thing. And it actually worked. You know, I was going on these training runs. I had a few friends who were running the half marathon for the first time too. And so we all were doing these training runs together. And my knee was feeling really good because I was easing it up. And I got to the morning of the race, and it was miserable. It was like 40 degrees and raining. You know, that weather where you're just like, why don't you just snow? Like, it's so cold. And they say get to the start line at least 45 minutes before the start, and so I panic and I get there over an hour before the start, which is insane because I lived a 10-minute walk from the start line. Like, I literally could have broken my leg and got to the start line on time. But I'm standing in this cold, cold rain, and I'm just sitting there, and I'm just like, I've never wanted to run a half marathon before. I signed up for this to do my training runs for Reach the Beach. I did all my runs. I could literally just be in bed right now. And I'm just like, I'm just gonna go home. And so I start to make this realization, and I'm kind of turning back towards the entrance. And that's finally when they like make the announcement, all right, everybody, here we go. And they like pull out all the stops. And now all of a sudden this like huge wave of people is walking to the start line, and I can't go against them. And there's 25,000 people who run the Brooklyn Half Marathon. So I'm sort of like, I guess I'm just gonna run with them for a while. And like at a mile, it goes back towards my apartment. So I'm like, I could just peel off if I want. But what happens is I get there, and the second that starting gun sounds, it's all those adrenaline spikes I felt at the beginning of the races before multiplied by 25,000. I am just like on this high that I've never felt before, and we're all just moving as one big wave of people. And the second the race starts, the rain is actually perfect for running. You know, it's keeping me cool. I'm not thinking about it, and I'm just going. And the Brooklyn Half Marathon course, it's the first half of it, you're literally just going like up and around and through Prospect Park. And it's these runs I've made at this point dozens of times, and I feel like I have home field advantage. And so I get to the second half of the Brooklyn Half Marathon, which is awful. People run the Brooklyn Half Marathon in here before? Have we have some? Yeah. And it's not awful because it's hard. It's awful because it's boring. Literally, you spend a 10K just running on one single street the entire time. There are no turns. There is no elevation. And as you're running, you pass avenues. And the first avenue you pass is Avenue A. And then you keep going, and the second avenue you pass is Avenue B. And then Avenue C. And you're just like, there's no way they're going to go all the way to Z. And they go all the way to Z, and then there's 3 more avenues after Z. And I'm just like this. I feel like I'm running on a treadmill in real life. Like, that's what it felt like. And as I'm running that first mile in this like treadmill time, I find this guy, and I'm somebody who's like, I'm starting to realize like during these races, sometimes I'll follow somebody who I think is running about what I want to be running. And so the guy I found was like a guy who was at least 70 years old. But I follow him for like the first mile, and he's running. I get my little like pace check-in, and it's the exact pace I want to run. And so for the entirety of that 10K to end that half marathon, I am just like 20 feet behind this guy, and he just is on it. His pace is so good. We cross the finish line, and the first thing I want to do is hug this guy. And I'm like, oh, he has no idea who I am. But I make it. I finish this half marathon, and it's the first half marathon I ever did. And again, it's not something I was like setting out to do. But my girlfriend is there to greet me at the finish line, and she's really proud of me, so I feel like, oh yeah, this is something I should feel proud of. And then we get on the subway, and we head back to our apartment. We had just moved in together 2 weeks before this race. And as we're on the subway, she's asking me about the race, and I'm like, I hated it, I'm never gonna do it again. And then she says, oh, we should run a race together sometime. And I'm just like, what? Haven't you seen how miserable this has made me? You want to do this? And she says, yeah, I just think that this is something that's important to you, and I want to be a part of that. And it's funny because I have this realization in that moment where it's been 5 years since I ran that Warrior Dash. And I'd signed up for these races. I was doing some other races on the side. You know, I had bought like a fitness watch to track my runs. I bought like foam rollers and massage guns for my IT band stuff and all this new clothing. And I was like, oh my God, I think I might be a runner. And it was just not something I had ever thought of myself as. And if the person that I loved was seeing that in me, then I guess that might be a part of my identity now. And so I said, yeah, we should totally run a race together sometime, thinking it was just something that would never come up again and we'd be fine. But 2 months later, we were on a road trip, and we ended up in Cleveland, Ohio. Anybody been to Cleveland, Ohio before? Yeah, you can just skip it. We very quickly learned there's nothing to do in Cleveland, Ohio. We just ended it. I literally went there to see a friend who had moved there, and I got there, and she had moved before I got there, like left Cleveland. And I was like, okay, I guess we got to find something. So we go to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and then it's like, now what? and we're on Google, like, what to do in Cleveland, and we find out that the house from A Christmas Story is in Cleveland, Ohio. And it just happens to be my girlfriend's favorite Christmas movie. So I'm like, great, let's go kill some more time at this Christmas Story house. And so we go to the house, and there's this, gift shop with all this stupid stuff for the thing, like little mini lamp, keychains, all this stuff, right? And in the gift shop, there's a sign, a poster that just says, A Christmas Story 5K, 10K holiday run, virtual options available. And she sees this and she's like, this is the race. And I'm like, what? And because again, not my movie, but like because this movie is such a big movie for Christmas people, every year they have a physical race in Cleveland that people show up and run for. But because it's so popular, anybody in the country can sign up and they will send you a packet with a bib, a medal, a t-shirt. The morning of the race, you wake up wherever you are and you run it, and it's like you're doing this thing with everybody else. I didn't really understand it, but she was so excited about it that I was like, great, let's sign up. This was the summer. Things were going really well between us. The race was in December. Things started not going so well between us. Yeah, it's not that any one thing was going wrong. I just think that I was having trouble. Again, we had just moved in together. I had never lived with a partner before. And I was quickly learning that I was hard to live with in a relationship. Not because I was like a sloppy roommate or anything, but because I'm an introvert. And when you're with somebody who's not an introvert, that balance was tough for me to figure out. Like, I would get home from work, be worn out from the day, and need to recharge in a corner. And she would get home from work and be like, what are we doing tonight? And I loved her and I wanted to hang out with her, so we'd go to comedy shows, we'd go to movies, we'd go to restaurants. But it started to feel like I was just having fries night after night after night, and I needed a salad. And so I'd say, like, hey, I kind of just need to do my own thing tonight. And I could tell that she was disappointed. And then I'd be like, hey, are you okay? And she'd be like, I'm fine. And in a regular dynamic, you'd be like, this is something you could talk through and figure out. But this was just becoming this pattern in our relationship where it felt like something was wrong and one of us would ask about it and the other person would just be like, I'm fine. And we were just I'm fining our way through problems for months. And it was like every problem was just something we were throwing over into the corner of our small 2-bedroom apartment. And there were just these like problems for later. And so this was happening over months, and the morning of the race comes up, and we're barely having conversation at this point. So the idea of going on a race together feels like not something that's gonna happen. And I say, hey, do you still wanna do this? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, I'm surprised. I'm like, oh, okay, so, well, I know we signed up for the 10K. You wanna just do a 5K? And she's like, no, well, we signed up for the 10K. And I'm trying to be like, no one knows we're doing that. Like, they've already sent us this stupid medal in the mail that says we ran the race. Like, you don't have to do anything. But she's like, no, we should do the 10K. And so we go out and we put the little bibs on and we go to Prospect Park. And it's the weirdest race I've ever ran. Because up until this point, every time I've run a race, there's like hundreds of people there and there's a lot of energy. And it's just the two of us running side by side in Prospect Park. We both have headphones on listening to different music. And like every few seconds, our shoulders are brushing up against each other. But it truly feels like I'm in New Hampshire and she's in Cleveland. And the entirety of this 10K, it's an hour that we're just running side by side together. I'm just unpacking all those problems that were sitting in the pile of our apartment. And I'm just like, I don't know what we're supposed to do. There's this, we're not talking about this, we're not talking about this. And it's all building into this like tornado in my brain, and we get home from the run, and I just say, hey, I'm not really sure what's going on, but I feel like neither of us is happy, and I want to talk and figure out like why this is and what we can do. And so we start having this conversation, and it's kind of the first time we're sort of breaking down these barriers we haven't been talking about. But after 15 minutes, she's like, hey, I'm so sorry. I'm supposed to meet a friend for lunch. I have to go. And I didn't know she was leaving, and it felt like, okay, well, this is a pause, and we'll pick this up later. And so I kind of just go on with my day. I'm supposed to go meet up with some friends, and I'm out with them having a nice time, and I get this text from her. And it just says, can you promise me we'll be together no matter what? And that's a really hard text message to get, right? Because in one sense, I know where she's coming from. Like, I did early on in our relationship, I ended our relationship. I got scared and I ran away and we got back together. But I know there was probably always that part of her that was just like, when is this gonna happen again? And it probably felt like this moment right now. And that's not what I was trying to do. But I also wanted to talk and figure out, like, how do we create a sustainable relationship together? And that has to involve pulling these problems out and working through them. And that's also a very hard thing to send in a text message, right? Like, that is a wall of text that you don't have easy emojis to send. And so I do my best to send that message back to her. And I don't hear anything back that night. And then the next morning I get an email from her, and it just gives me her logistics for moving out the apartment. And it was weird because it was like we didn't even have the conversation. And so she moves out a few days later, and I just come home every night that week to this empty apartment we have, and I start a 1,000-piece puzzle. And every night I just come home, and I'm just like working on this puzzle. Because in my brain, I'm like, if I give my brain any time to think about the rest of the world, it's gonna explode. And if I just focus on solving this puzzle, that's all that matters, and that's okay. And I come home every night, Monday through Friday. Friday, I come home and I finish the puzzle. It's a puzzle of Times Square. I guess, I don't know. I'm a huge Times Square fan. But I finished the puzzle, and I put it in a frame that she had left when she moved out. And then I put it on the wall of my apartment at this point. And I was healed. No. I started going to therapy, which that did help for the healing for sure. But it was weird because I felt like I had started to find a footing in my life and a normalcy in my life. And so then I was just like, well, I guess I'm just going to go through the pattern I'd created now. I had signed up for the Brooklyn Half Marathon, and so I signed up again. And so as I was like training for that run the second time around, I wasn't doing my training runs as much. A lot of our friends that I was running with the first year, they were our mutual friends, and I felt weird kind of like reaching out to them. I just wanted to like let her just figure it out. And so I'm not going on these training runs. The morning of the marathon comes up. It's like much nicer weather conditions, but I feel a lot worse. And I'm running, and I get to Avenue L before I have to start walking. And in my head, I'm just like, I have more than half the alphabet to go. Like, this is a long time to walk. And so I'm kind of doing this thing where I walk an avenue, and I run an avenue, and I walk an avenue, and I run an avenue. And I get to the end. And the end of the half marathon, you're on the Coney Island boardwalk, and it's very tightly packed, and there's so many people running it. And I'm woozy, like I don't feel great, and they just send you off. They're just like, great, here's your wet medal, good luck. And so I'm wandering off like into the world, and I'm like, what's going on? And I turn, and I see my ex-girlfriend. There are 25,000 people who run the Brooklyn Half Marathon, and she had signed up and ran it. And now we're face to face, and I proceed to make the worst small talk I have ever made in my life, which is not something I'm good at to begin with, but I'm just like, oh, hey, hi, I didn't know you were running. Cool, oh, that's great, see you later. And I run away. And the second I get out of her eye line, the first thought that pops into my head isn't like, this was a mistake, we should get back together. I pull out my phone and I look up her time. And she beat me. But that first thought was, I'm proud of her. And it's funny, this idea that like breakups are another gateway drug into running. Like 6 months ago was her first race she ever ran. This breakup propelled her to run a half marathon, and then she beat me. That fall she ran the New York City Marathon. And I guess I got the consolation of therapy and feeling okay, like. But then really, at that point, I was like, I can't just move on with my life. I can't just go to my schedule. And so I got back into my zone. I get back into my patterns, and I do reach the beach that fall, and I sign up for the Brooklyn Half Marathon again that spring, and then the world shuts down. And so suddenly now I'm just left being in my apartment all the time. That was our apartment, and and I don't feel great about my mental health, which all of us, I'm sure, were feeling the same way at that time. And it's funny, like going outside at that point felt so hard to me. My mailbox was right outside the building, and I would get stressed just going down to get the mail. But I knew that like going outside is good for your mental health, and I was trying to run, but I also knew that like this COVID thing had something to do with your lungs, and there was no way to know if you had it or how to get it. And so I would go on runs as a way to say like, well, if I can run, I can't have COVID. But because I wasn't running a lot, I'd run a mile and my lungs would burn, and then I'd be like, oh my God, I have COVID. And it was just not a good time for me mentally, and so I just stopped running for a while. And then when the world started opening up again, one of the first things I did was I joined a soccer league. I was like, I want to do this again. And so I joined one of these rec leagues in New York City. These rec leagues have one rule, and it's don't slide tackle. 3 weeks into the season, this guy slide tackles me in my right ankle, and it turns almost 90 degrees. And I have the worst sprained ankle of my life. And I try running like a month later. Like I'm walking fine within a few days, but a month later, I still can't run. 2 months later, I still can't run. And then it's winter. I'm like, I guess I'm just going to stop running for a while. And it's funny because with COVID and with that injury, it had been the longest I had gone without running since starting. And I was missing it, which is just not something I ever thought I would feel. Like I thought I could just stop running the way Murakami stopped smoking and then be fine. And I wasn't. And so I got through that winter, and the Brooklyn Half Marathon, it's a lottery system. So it came around, and I was like, I'm just going to sign up, and if I get it, I'll do it. And I get in. But at this point now, I'm into my 30s, and my body, it was already not doing great before then. I had my IT band stuff. I had this back injury that I got working in reality television that had never gone away. And now I had my ankle injury, and I just started being like, I gotta just take care of myself a little bit more. And I went to one of those stores where you can get your like running style tested, and then they'll tell you the right shoe for your feet. And so they test me, and they're like, yeah, your right foot is a half size bigger than your left foot, and your right foot doesn't have any arch, and your left foot has too big of an arch. So to have the right shoes for my feet, I would need 2 separate pairs of running shoes. And then honestly, I got this pair that they recommended, and I had new pains in my feet I had never felt before. And so I just returned them and went back to the shoes I'd been wearing this whole time. And so the morning of this race comes up, and it's the half marathon again. And I get there, and I don't have all those thoughts in my head about worrying about things. I'm just like, I'm just going to do my best. And so I show up in the morning of the race. I get there like 30 minutes early because I've learned my lesson. And as I'm there, I'm in that area, and I'm just kind of waiting to start, and everyone's around. And it's the first time I'm not in my head, and I'm actually listening to the world around me. And I hear this one couple, and they're like, man, I just got new shoes. I don't think I broke them in enough. I'm going to get blisters. And they're all worried about that thing. And then I hear these 2 women talking, and one of them's like, oh, I just got this new sports bra, and I'm really worried it's going to make my nipples chafe. And then I hear this other guy who's like, I really hope I don't shit my pants, which we all know as runners is one of the biggest fears you can have running. And I'm just realizing that we're all these like imperfect people trying to do this thing. And so we start the race. And again, I'm pretty good for those first few miles because we're running in my home territory. But then we get to the point where I get into the park, and I kind of need my pacer. Like I'm needing it a little earlier than I think. And so I find one of these running groups that are like pace groups at these big races where somebody's like holding up a sign that's like, I'm going to run a 2.5-hour marathon. So if you hang out with me, we'll do that hopefully. And I don't like those people because it's too big of a group, and I don't feel good in those big group situations, but in life and in running. And but I decide if I get in front of the group and they're slowly chasing me and I just stay in front of them, I have my own space and I'm running at the pace they're running. And so I do that for like a mile. I'm running with this group. And then there's this part of the Brooklyn Half Marathon in Prospect Park where we have to go up this hill. And it's not a terrible hill, but it's a hill. But I run it all the time, so it's not something I'm worried about. But all of a sudden, the pace leader in this group is like, all right, everybody, you've trained months for this moment. This hill is not going to defeat you. I don't care if you have to crawl. I don't care if you have to cry. We are making it up this hill. And I'm just like, we are not going into war. We're running a race. Like this is, and it's just ruining my experience. So I end up running faster up the hill to get rid of this guy. And so I crush the hill, but I lose the group. And so now I'm in this like 5 mile area and I'm wandering and I'm looking for somebody. And I see this woman who's running and again, like looks confident in her pace. And I'm just saying like, okay, I'm gonna hang out like 20 feet behind her and see how she's doing. And after that first mile, it's my pace. I'm like, great, I have my person. But then as I'm like in my head about it, I'm start realizing that like that 20 feet ahead is kind of me just looking into the middle distance, which in this scenario is me just looking at her butt. And I'm like noticing it, but I'm like, well, I'm just looking. And I'm like, this feels weird though. And so then I look down at her feet. But now that I'm looking at her feet, I don't see enough of what's ahead of me. And so I go back up to her butt and I'm back at her butt again. I'm like, okay, I'll go to her head. And the problem is with her head, I can't see enough at my feet. And if there's something in front of me, and she's got this long hair that goes right down to her butt. And it's a cute butt, so it's hard to also not look at. But I'm getting very in my head about it. And again, that second mile, we're running at the exact pace I want to be running. And then we exit the park. And right when we exit the park, there's a group of cheerers and people holding signs and everything. And I see the sign right when I exit the park. And it just says, run like there's a cute person in front of you and a creep behind you. And it feels like somebody has turned on a spotlight and a siren. And they're just like, creep, 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 creep. And I peel away from this woman. So again, she has no idea what's happening. But I'm like, I don't want to be involved in this. But I lose my pacer. And around Avenue J, I start walking. And it's the earliest I've started walking running the Brooklyn Half Marathon. And I'm just like, hey, maybe this is what I am now. Like, this is kind of my best, and I'll figure it out. And so I'm doing that kind of walk an avenue, run an avenue, walk an avenue, run an avenue. And I get to mile 10, and I'm in my walking avenue, and I just hear from behind me somebody go, hey, Bryan. And I turn around, and my friend Andrew is there. And Andrew, he's like 6'4", and he always has this way of being like a smiling, happy presence whenever I see him. Like, we both are teachers, and we just saw each other on the streets in Brooklyn the other week. And I had a group of kids, and he had a group of kids. And he saw me across the street and was like, hey, Bryan. And I was like, hey, Andrew. And then all of his kids were like, hey, Bryan. And it was just as fun, like, and it was just that exact, hey, Bryan, right there. And he's got this big smile on his face. And all of a sudden, I'm like, oh, hey, man, what's up? And we're like running together. And I'm like, oh, I didn't know you were running this. And he's like, yeah, it's my first half marathon. I'm like, whoa, that's awesome. Like, how you feeling? He's like, feeling pretty good. I'm like, cool, well, I can run with you for a while if you want. And he just doesn't reply. And I'm realizing, like, he was moving pretty good, and he's in the zone, and I'm just going to slow him down, and he doesn't want to be mean. And I say, oh, or you can keep going if you want. He's like, cool, see you later. And he takes off. But again, he's 6'4", and he gets probably about, like, 50 yards out in front of me. And again, we're on the treadmill of this path where it's just straight and flat the whole way out. And so I see Andrew's head bobbing amongst the sea of runners, and I just decide that's going to be my pacer for a while. And so I'm running with Andrew, and his head's bobbing, and his head's bobbing. And I start to think of it as almost like a buoy in this ocean. And as I see it bobbing, I kind of see everything else like kind of float away. And I have this moment where I'm like, oh my God, this is the void. And I realize that calling out the void kind of ruins the idea of the void, but it's sort of the way that I experience the void. And then as I'm noticing that, I'm getting closer and closer to the buoy, but I'm not going any faster. And so I get to 12 miles, and I catch up to Andrew, and I'm like, hey, man. And the first words out of his mouth is, I don't know why anybody does this. And it's the first time I've really connected with a runner on the course before, and I'm like, yeah, man, I feel you. And he's now, like, he's really down on himself, and he's just like, I'm like, hey, well, we can run the last mile together. And he's like, no, just leave me. I'm fine. I truly, like, I'll just sit here on the side of the road and die. And I'm like, no, and again, I could tell he's very self-conscious about me being there. And so what I do, this thing where I kind of just get out, I don't know, maybe like 50 to 100 feet in front of him. And every 10th of a mile or so, I just make eye contact with him and just say like, hey, I'm here. I'm with you, I'm here. And so I do that for that whole mile. And I just make that eye contact, I look back and show them I'm with him. And we cross the finish line. And the first words out of his mouth are, "I'm never doing that again." And the first thing I think of is like, I probably will do that again. And it's funny because of all the times that I've run, it's the first time that I got to be a pacer for somebody else. And I feel like at this point you're like, he has been talking about running for an hour. Does he actually like it or not? And I definitely don't like running the way my friend Carl likes trail running. Like, I don't think I will ever like running the way he likes running. But I definitely like it more than my friend Andrew likes running, in the sense that I'm still doing it. I think the act of running itself I'm like meh about, but I do think that running has brought me to some really great places and great people. It's funny, when you work at a summer camp, like anybody I've ever met who's worked at any summer camp, there's kind of a shared language, and we could share stories about our summer camps, and it's this little bonding moment you have. And I've noticed that with running too. Like when I was doing this show in Scotland, and like run clubs would come to the show and then like buy me a drink after, and it was just this cool community. And they were like, "Oh, do you do a run club in New York?" And I was like, "No." And they're like, "You gotta join one." And the idea of a run club felt terrifying, because I was like, somebody's gonna see how badly I run and judge me for that. But they were so nice, and I was like, maybe I can find that here. And so for the past year, I've been with this run club in New York City, and they're all here tonight. So at the very least, you could use it to get people to come to your show. But it has been really nice. It's, we go on these runs and then we end at a bar, and we don't just go back to our 6 friends. We stay and we have a drink together, and it's this community that I've been able to find in the city. And it's funny, there was these 2 people who came to my show, and at the end they came up to me and they were like, "Oh my God, we met in the porta potty line at the Brooklyn Half Marathon, and we've been married for 4 years." And it's nice to know that running can bring people together and not just lead to breakups, right? But yeah, this idea of the marathon comes up, right? Because at this point I've run 6 half marathons. I've run Reach the Beach 7 times, so I've become that New Hampshire guy. But this marathon thing keeps coming up all the time. It's funny, this morning I actually just signed up for the New York City Marathon in November. No, wait, so I haven't run it yet, okay? And honestly, there's so much that could happen that would lead me to not running it, right? Like, I still don't know if I even want to do that, but I figured I'd at least give myself the opportunity to do it and figure it out later. But it does make me think about Haruki Murakami and his marathons and how he's been doing it into his 70s. And it's funny, I was at this race recently, and it was named for this guy, Al Gordon. And at the beginning of the marathon, the race, they were like, Al Gordon is somebody who's been in the New York City running community for years. He was an athlete his whole life, but he didn't run his first marathon until he was in his 80s. It's like, what? That's insane. And so again, I really don't know if I'm going to run the marathon this fall. And I think if I don't, what I will do, thinking about him and thinking about Phidippides, the first guy who ran a marathon, I think when I get to my 80s, I will run a marathon and then just die. And that will be my way to go. But the last chapter of the book, Murakami says, "I didn't run because anybody asked me to. I ran because I wanted to." And I find that very funny, because I didn't run because anybody asked me to. I ran because somebody forced me to. And then somebody asked me to. And then I just kind of kept doing it. And at this point, I think any run that I go on where I don't get injured or wade through a mud pit or go through a breakup feels like a success. Thank you.
Thank you.